on the Terriers, and every year I've enjoyed one.
It was a huge night out, and in my drunken stupor, I actually hit my groin on one of those chunky bollards. But as it turned out, it actually wasn't a bollard at all. I was sexually assaulted by Brad Giroux. I know it might sound strange to say it, but if I had the choice between keeping Cameron Smith or Augusto Pinochet in power, I'd still lean with Pinochet. The trio would have to be Craig Gower, Jason Moody, and Sam Obst. Because I just can't see another three players fitting in musically with Craig McLaughlin and Check 1-2. Hello and welcome to the final episode of the Voluntary Tackle for 2019. The only NRL podcast hoping that Sydney's New Year's Eve fireworks display is replaced with a ceremonial burning of Jared Haynes' legacy. I'm your host, Eamon Brown, and today on the show we'll be discussing Wayne Bennett's integrity, David Fifita's punishment, Jake Friend's frail bones, State of Origin squads, and of course we'll also be looking at how the Bulldogs will fare in 2020. But first, I am joined in the abandoned 70s discotheque by two people today, which I think technically doubles our listenership. I'm not sure. The first is a man who once started up a support group for those left psychologically damaged by Russell Crowe's singing in La Miserable. That mental health advocate I refer to is, of course, Xander Risotto, and making his second appearance on the show, the man referred to in Twitter boardroom meetings as a major economic headwind. It's Media Watch Mario. Welcome, lads, to the show.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to have to start with you, Mario. Whatever possessed you to want to come on a show like this? I mean, are you just a masochistic person or someone who wants to self-harm? What's going on here?
I was just hoping that my residual hatred from 2013 would allow me to commit murder without feeling any sort of guilt on people such as yourselves.
Okay, well, that's a strategy.
Sort out a couple of Roosters fans.
Well, I'm incredibly scared all of a sudden. I'm feeling decidedly less informative as I was a moment ago.
You're wearing your Premier's shirt.
I know. That's the other thing. I haven't exactly dressed in camouflage here today, Mario. I have flamboyantly dressed in my Premier's shirt, and I actually considered putting one of those limited edition VB cans of the Roosters emblazed emblem on the table as well. I'm glad I refrained from doing that. I may live now.
Well, if it helps, I was at that grand final in the Roosters Bay cheering for your team, so that particular grand final
against Melbourne,
No, against Raiders.
Oh, against the Raiders.
That's back to back.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
that's right, mate.
That particular. Well, it could have been either one.
That's the thing as Roosters fans, you tend to lose track. That's the issue. Before I get to you, Xander, how's your off-season been, Mario?
My off-season, just really relaxing, surprisingly. My job is supposed to keep me really busy this time of year, and instead it hasn't, and I've spent lots of time watching NBA.
Oh, okay. How dare you mention another sport on this podcast, sir?
I mean, I've been watching replays of the 2008 and 2011 grand finals.
That's all you've been doing. You've been just trying to follow Daly Cherry Evans wherever he goes, because listeners may not know this, but obviously you're a diehard Manly fan. Has that been your whole life, or were you converted through some kind of evangelist at some point?
I started watching rugby league with no help from anybody else, just decided to watch it one day, and I said, okay, who's got a nice colour? So I started following Canberra when I was a kid, but then once I started school right near Brookvale Oval and was surrounded by Manly fans, and I was only 9 years old, and decided, okay, I should follow this team now.
Fair enough. So you were a conformist very early.
I suppose so. It just seemed easier to follow the team where I lived than, be the outcast.
I completely agree with that. In fact, I was born and bred in the eastern suburbs, for the record, so no one can lynch me. I'm not some kind of weird blow-in. And Xander, you yourself as well in a similar boat.
But a little bit like you, Mario, when I was, in primary school, I think everyone in the family watched the Raiders just because they won everything.
I think every kid our age actually loved the Canberra Raiders. I love that team too.
In the 80s, they were just, they basically had the Kangaroos in that club side. It was ridiculous.
I remember, I think there was a 94 team they had. We're really drifting here, but fuck it. It's the off-season. No one's listening. Where they just had this team where you had a number of players who could just run 100 metres by themselves and beat 8 people. Like Noah Andrew, Ken Nagus, Brett Mullins. And it could have been any of them at any point. And I remember distinctly watching a game against St George, big shout out to all the Dragons fans, where they destroyed them, blew them off the park. And I think Ken Nagus at one point beat about 8 players, pulled up his shorts because they were falling off, and then beat 3 more before scoring. Those were the days for the Raiders fans. Lamentably, it wasn't this year, because they got beaten by the legendary Sydney Roosters. Any opportunity to shoehorn my blatant bias into the show, I'll certainly take it. Xander, we're going to go over to you, mate. You've just come back from a trip from abroad. I believe you're in New Zealand. Did you find any talented batsmen over there? Because I think the team could surely use some.
No, I hear that all left. They were actually they were out fighting the fires.
Or playing for England.
Playing for
That's
England,
right.
yeah.
They beat what they
What was
forcibly deported, were they?
What was it like? England's a good one. I remember back in the day when they were decent. Like they called them Noah's Ark because they had two of everything. A couple of South Africans, a couple of Kiwis,
That's it.
A couple of people from the West Indies.
And a couple more. I remember there was at one point, I'm sure the composition of that English team was about 45% South African.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, they had a great team, but it wasn't theirs.
I loved it. Even was it Kevin Peterson during the Rugby World Cup was like, against England, he was tweeting for both of them. And then when South Africa won, he's like, yes, go South Africa.
But that's not the perfect indictment right there. He didn't know who to go for.
Because I could suggest that as Roosters fans, you guys should be big fans of the English teams because none of your players come from here.
Oh, I could feel that barb coming my way.
that's
I could
really-
see the smirk on Mario's face. Did you detect it coming?
But that's really only appropriate for Souths because half their team were English until recently.
Oh, well, yeah, if you're going to take a literalist example of it. Very quickly, on your New Zealand trip, I don't want to drift too far because I wanted to know if you went to the town of Bluff. Did
No.
you end up going there? Because on my last trip there, I've probably already bored the podcast listeners with this before, but it's such an unusual place because there's basically just one main street. New Zealand, not a terribly populated country, as it turns out, but this is one of the least populated places, and it had the strangest composition of shops I've ever seen in my life. It went like sex shop, wedding shop, and milk bar in that sequence all the way down. And I remember thinking, why in loads
Over
of
and
three?
over.
Over and over and over again, but different proprietors, obviously, I assume.
I would think those three could work perfectly together because they lead into each other in a way.
Oh, well, pray tell, Mario, because I couldn't crack this puzzle. Give me the night out in Bluff the way you see it.
Well, you walk into the sex shop, you
Yeah.
make a baby, you get married, and pretty soon one of them you was producing milk.
Yeah, pretty. Okay,
Wait,
I
do
like
you
it.
buy the milk or do you sell it to them? I mean, that's you sell them human milk.
So I assume these are milkshakes made out of the human mammary. That's disgusting, Mario.
I suspect in 2020 that's probably going to be the biggest trend.
No,
You know-
I think in 2019 that was a trend. There was stuff about bodybuilders having breast milk in 2019. I'm not even
Yeah,
kidding.
they had to shut
Yeah.
one down. Apparently, there was a place, I think it was somewhere in Europe, could have been the Netherlands. Sounds like I'm making up news there. But it was getting lines around the street. But then people were getting these horrible illnesses because it was unfiltered human milk that adults are not supposed to sort of drink en masse. And in a way, that's Darwinism, isn't it? Because if you're willing to drink the milk from another woman's teat as an adult, I hope you do die of some rare disease.
Opposed to going, down to the supermarket, just getting it from Cheryl is probably not the best bet. It's just like
I prefer mine on tap, personally. Look, we'll probably kick into the first. This is an NRL podcast, so we probably should kick into the first topic
right,
of the day.
rugby league.
That's right. Seamless,
Maybe
fellas.
they're all drinking, human milk.
it might be one of those health kicks the Warriors get onto.
Or
Like
Des
with the breathing.
Hazel's latest scientific, whackery.
Oh yeah, he's into that. It was him and Freddie. They're both into it. Freddie with the bare feet and the breathing.
But look, just when we thought the Latrell Mitchell saga was over, gents, and we thought, well, okay, he's going to definitely go into Souths in 2021. I think we can put an end to all this rigmarole. Souths coach Wayne Bennett had this to say. He said, "We won't be signing Latrell. We have enough centres." This is apparently what he told the Courier Mail. Now, given Wayne's propensity in the past for
lie?
playing mind games, or if you will, just lie, especially to the media, can we trust Wayne on this, or is he playing ducks and drakes with the press?
Yeah, I don't believe him. And the fact that he said we have enough centres is kind of a bit of a joke, actually, because it's no secret that Latrell wants to play fullback, and that's where they'd play him. So
Is that right? See, I didn't actually think about that because to me, he's definitely not a fullback.
Well, I mean, I know to you he's not, but but Latrell thinks he's a fullback.
I know that much.
Yeah, but Al Johnson's not a fullback either.
No, and they don't really have a full-time fullback in that team, right? So I mean, maybe Bennett will be willing to give him a punt there, and then he might come back and say, "Well, I said we had enough centres, but I didn't say we had enough fullbacks."
Hey, do you guys think Alex Johnson's doing a fair job there? I think he's actually a pretty versatile player he's been fairly good as a fullback. He's not one of those guys that chimes into line quite enough yet, but I would have thought he might be a fairly good long-term proposition. I'm getting a lot of shakes of the head here.
I think he's maybe an above average winger who's been put into fullback because they didn't have anybody else.
Yeah, agree.
just as a bit of a
He's
stopgap.
he's not busy enough and he's not strong enough in defence to be a full-time fullback, I don't think.
So, Xander, you're assuming here that this is all a lie and that Latrell Mitchell is going to go to Souths and he's going to play fullback.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
where else is he going to go now? I mean, the Tigers, like if he wanted $1 million, they're willing to give it to him, and he's stuffed them around at this point.
Yeah.
Or-
Have you noticed the Tigers, unfortunately, they have come across a bit like that kind of desperate person on Tinder or
Yeah, they
something.
have.
Because even now, even though he said, no, I'm not really
They've
interested.
come across like Jerry off Rick and Morty, like wanting to stay with Beth. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just like...
it definitely is an air of desperation about their tone. Because even only a couple of days ago, the CEO said, look, it's still on the table. If he's willing to talk
There's
with us.
such a contrast there between them and the Roosters, where they basically said you got 1.6 million over 2 years, take it or leave it, and if you don't take it now, it's off.
Yeah.
And whereas the Tigers said, well, we're still going to talk.
Well, it's interesting you say fullback, right? Because like my mail is that they are looking to get rid of Gagai, and
right.
he's been playing at centre, so it seems like there's an easy shift there that maybe Wayne Bennett's not willing to expose publicly just yet, but I think they are shopping him around, and if they can get Gagai out of there, Latrell Mitchell's a perfect fit at centre.
That's certainly the rumour, is that Gagai will end up at the Titans because they're the only club stupid enough to think he's good.
I do love having this continual negativity on my left shoulder. I could use this in my general life, to be honest. So Gagai, obviously, he had a very, I think, especially by his own standards, this season was pretty terrible. But I actually thought the seasons leading into that, it's been pretty good.
Yes and no. If you value scoring tries, then he's had a pretty rubbish career outside of Queensland.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
He scored like the fewest tries for a starting player of that many games just about ever, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We could ask Andrew RLP and he could probably confirm the details.
Yeah, I
but-
know, and we will.
Yes.
But he had a fairly decent season for the Knights, I thought, before he came across the Souths as well. Felt like he was building to something, but lamentably it didn't really go anywhere. But anyway, that might be the shift. So we're all sort of fairly convinced that Wayne Bennett is lying here. Because he has had some form on the ball. We know he lied about James Roberts when they brought him across. He reportedly lied about to the Brisbane Broncos board in his attempt to sort of save his job at one point. He also lied about having a circumcised penis to one of his former lovers. So he's willing to go to great extremes, although that's quite baffling. I'm not sure.
I mean, still, that's not the most extreme lie he told. He also told Nick Politis he was coming to the Roosters at one point.
That's true, yeah. And apparently, if you can
Shook
believe,
his hand.
if you believe Phil Gould as well, he was going to go to Penrith at one point. He was going to go to Titans as a coach when he was up there at Brisbane. So basically, he's a lying scumbag. Is that the consensus we've got here?
I actually would like to see Latrell end up at the Titans.
I would like that as well, but I'd like to hear one more.
Because I think he would crash and burn dismally. And it would just be funny for lols. But if you're not being too mean about it, they don't seem to rate AJ Brimson as a fullback there. And so that would actually be a decent chance for him to prove himself at fullback and potentially prove us all wrong and that he is a genuinely great player.
Brimson's, I think, a great player. I think he's a
agree.
major prospect. Unusual that they wouldn't, see that as a major thing. I mean, I think he's
Unusual
actually
that the Titans wouldn't recognise the talent.
This is very true. Now, we did also put this out to social media and we asked, is Wayne Bennett telling fibs about Latrell Mitchell not going to Souths? People weren't fooled by it. 84% of people said, yes, Wayne Bennett is lying. Welcome back to the Voluntary Tackle. Now, Brisbane's David Fifita will not face any disciplinary action from the NRL Integrity Unit due to a lack of conclusive evidence over the incident that led him to being jailed in Bali last month. Now, lads, given Fifita reportedly paid this security guard or whoever he was that he punched in the face a fairly large sum of money, isn't this evidence enough that he's already rearranged a guy's face? It seems a lack of evidence seems like an unusual term to use when he's clearly done this. Am I right?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
I mean, look, compare it to other things. I know Twitter always goes into an uproar, so that's no guide of morality as such. But I think the uproar on this occasion might be a little bit justified because there's a whole bunch of precedents where people have been probably unjustly rubbed out of the game for much less than this.
It's a question of like, what is the issue? Is it, has he brought the game into disrepute and do we know enough about what happened as well? Like, I mean, he punched the guy in the face. Was he provoked? The guy settled. He paid it out. I don't know. I mean, it kind of feels like one of those things that is a story because of the internet and all the rest of it. Doesn't feel like that big a deal, but maybe you're right. I mean, it is enough evidence to show that maybe he was a bit of an oaf. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you said there's probably some missing gaps there in the story, but wouldn't it be pertinent then to kind of get that out to the light of day, let everyone know that this was either a provoked incident or something that was a bit more unseemly?
It sounds like this is your first time understanding anything around the Brisbane Broncos.
Oh, yeah.
Please
point,
regale me. There has always been, obviously, this
Brisbane mafia,
perception.
right?
There's a perception that there's one rule for Brisbane and one rule for everyone else as well.
I mean, there's nothing... The problem is because everything's been swept under the rug, you can't say anything because I've certainly heard rumours from sources I trust on certain issues around the Broncos, but I wouldn't say them out loud.
How is Wayne Bennett, by the way? Is he still in good health?
I said trusted sources.
Oh, I'm
trust
sorry.
him.
Of course. No, well, I know that obviously they're a major economic advantage for the game, and the NRL are sort of at odds to want to meddle with that. So I know that there's an incentive to kind of want to sweep these things under the rug.
But it's not even like the NRL, right? I mean, what Mario was talking about is the fact that even the Brisbane media kind of close ranks and don't report on this stuff, so they don't add any fuel to it, and they kind of deprive it of oxygen.
Well, I'm quite sick of your Courier Mail bashing, to be honest with you. It is a bona fide rag of integrity. I'll have you know.
It seems to be only the Sydney media that reports on issues.
Yeah.
The Sydney media will out everything. The Melbourne media are the absolute experts of covering things up. And I figure whoever is in charge of the Courier Mail must have done some internship down at one of the Melbourne papers and so understands...
Learned how to be a PR champion for the AFL in the NRL in the style that the Melbourne media do for the AFL. Yeah.
So I think David Fifita's kind of doomed himself at the Brisbane Broncos. His career's as good as over from this anyway, because the reality is, you look at the certain established Brisbane players, when they go out and they perform off field, they do it properly. And he's just shown that he doesn't have any sort of commitment to the cause. So how can he play along such... club legends like Matt Lodge, if that's the sort of off-season standards that he sets.
You're
Lift
right.
your game, David. At least threaten a child.
Exactly. He was just trying to fit in, wasn't he, really? Yes. He was doing his best. No, you're right. I'd say the calibre of moral human that they've attempted to recruit over the last couple of years, it is a great culture fit, now that I think about it. Great point raised, Mario.
And, wasn't it like they were the NRL club that were sniffing around Israel Folau? They're just wanting people who are effectively troublemakers.
And they had James Roberts there, and there's been plenty of stories and rumours about him.
Yeah. I've heard some of them as well.
And they were very upset that Robert Mugabe died, because obviously they would have loved to have put him in as chairman. So there's a lot of rude and missed opportunities up there. But look, I know, just to provide some context for the listeners, there obviously has been some cases where, in my opinion, at least, people have been harshly dealt with. And I guess the two that come to mind are Dylan Napa and Mitchell Pearce. Strangely, both Roosters players. I swear it's a coincidence.
How about we go to someone that's not a Roosters player, someone like Adam Elliott?
Adam Elliott, what a blow, what a G up that was.
That was
absolutely.
A complete load of nothing, and he just got this huge punishment for nothing.
Yeah, so for any listeners that don't know, it was a Mad Monday celebration. As you do, you get drunk and you have fun, and media were kind of hanging outside near the dustbins, hoping to catch images of something, and unfortunately they caught too much of Adam Elliott, who had stripped down.
It wasn't on a dustbin, they were up on a balcony of something.
Telescopic lens or something?
There were several stories up at a hotel, right? Basically indoors, and but following what you would expect the advice to be, is keeping away from the public eye. And they just,
And so, can anyone remember the exact punishment for Adam Elliott? Because
250,000, I think it was.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah. So you look at something like that, which is so innocuous. In fact, he hasn't even done anything wrong, in my opinion, not even marginally. He's just having a good time at a private function. Yep. So that's a great example, Mario. And yet we've got this incident where the NRL Integrity Unit says there's nothing to see here, and you can understand that the fans thinking that there's a great hypocrisy here.
And that's the question, right? It's the standard.
Yeah, we can't unsee what we've all seen. We've seen
Adam Elliott's penis.
I meant with David Fifita.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The juxtaposition there.
I know. I'm trying to follow along. Sorry. I'm slow.
Sorry. Looking at this sock you've got me talking into.
Yeah, that's right.
Made me think of Adam Elliott's penis.
Your microphone does look quite phallic, and I apologise for that. But no, to finish your point, I feel like I intruded there, Mario, what you're saying.
I think that was it.
Well, look, let's say I love these thought experiments where we are the NRL. What do we think would be a just punishment, even though, Xander, you pointed out, We may not know all the facts, but what should be a just punishment for David Fifita in this case, if indeed he has just punched a guy in the face fairly unprovoked?
I think if you take his name out of it and you just say, in a hypothetical situation where player X punches random person unprovoked, so it's not necessarily him, then I don't care if there's no charges pressed. If there's any evidence that the NRL can present, then that's bringing the game into disrepute, and there's got to be some sort of punishment that affects himself and his club. Therefore, it might be as anywhere from 2 to 10 weeks out or something like that, and a monetary fine.
And a fairly hefty fine,
that the club is not allowed to pay on his behalf is the big catch.
That's actually a very good point, because that's a bit of an out for responsibility that's been set before. Xander, do you agree with that kind of scale of punishment in this case? Taking Fifita's name out of it?
I think that's an extremely fair point. And, you know, what you brought up before, the standard that's been applied to previous players is what everyone thinks about, right? And, at the end of the day, if he's punched a guy in the head, without any evidence that the guy would, call him some awful name. I don't know. Yeah,
exactly. Even then, say he's called him an awful name. I mean, rearranging his face is probably not, a great response.
I also think that a good way to try and encourage clubs to hire the right players rather than going for the Matt Lodges of the world, any fines should come out of the next year's salary cap. So even if the player has to pay it himself, or the club does, we don't really care. If it's Adam Elliott has done the wrong thing, which he didn't, and he got a $250,000 fine, that coming out of the next season's cap would really make you think, is it worth taking a risk on the James Roberts and the Matt Lodges of the world?
It's a great point.
It's a really good idea. It would incentivise.
How dare you put so much good thought into this podcast? We gave you at least 10 instructions before coming on. Definitely all of them were, don't say anything logical that makes sense. Sorry, Xander.
No, I think they're brilliant ideas, right? Like, I mean, you've had a couple of off seasons from hell. Like, this year has been nowhere near as bad as last year. But if you had a kind of incentivization for a no dickhead policy across the NRL, then you would hopefully see just a reduction in those incidents year on year.
Yeah, and I love the idea of making it an economic risk. So it's not just we need to make sure we're a brand that the community trusts and likes and all those other things.
Tax on stupidity.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also... It would be, you wouldn't see someone like the Dragons with the ridiculous decision to keep Jack DeBellin on their books, etc., training with the club. If they at least were showing they were putting him at arm's length, then the NRL might feel more lenient towards them. Whereas the fact is, everyone wants the Dragons to fail right now because they're supporting this alleged rapist, and just it's fine that you don't sack him because of due process and all that sort of stuff, but don't actively support him and help his court case and try and get him back into the game just because you're useless at your job of hiring and training players.
Do I feel like that's a slightly different scenario? I mean, I take your point. I think they're all right on point. But the idea of take the Fifita case versus the DeBellin case, and as you said, due process being the sort of distinguishing factor. Is it wrong for a club to support a player where he hasn't been proven to have done anything wrong yet? Whereas Fifita clearly has paid someone, and it seems like it's an acknowledgement that he's done something wrong.
Yeah, sure. Fifita's paid.
Yeah, that's very true. For the listeners, Mario was using air quotes. I feel like I needed to communicate that.
I think it's a messy area. You think of you can think of examples like Sean Kenny Dowell with his domestic violence charge.
I would mention Brett Stewart, but
very
Brett
true.
Stewart, another really good example.
Yep.
But I do kind of think that you almost need to put those guys on ice until because I mean the corollary is if they get proven to be guilty, then you've just continued to support somebody who's committed this horrible thing. I mean you almost need to take them out of the picture while the due process plays itself out. So I agree with.
Well, at least I like the no fault stand down because they're not saying you're guilty. They're saying because of this, take some time out. And had Brett Stewart been suspended for a period of time on a no fault stand down setup, then it wouldn't have been David Gallop effectively saying, you're guilty, piss off, which is what it was, even though he was innocent, and there was plenty of evidence available to the public that he was innocent.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's it puts some distance between the NRL and the issue without having them take sides, really.
Yeah. Is there a chance that people can manipulate and use that rule, for example, to accuse a player on the eve of a huge game, which will mean they'll be automatically stood down. I'm always trying to analyse the inadvertent ripples here.
There's a fair bit of legal consequences to doing that, and
Totally.
I can't imagine any
Defamation laws in Australia are pretty strict.
Yeah.
True.
You're if you're on that end of it, you're risking an awful lot of damage to yourself if you're the person making that accusation with nothing behind it.
And if there was anything linking that person to an involved club, that club would be pushing shit uphill just to stay in the comp.
Yeah.
Well, shot down in flames there. Welcome back to the voluntary tackle. Now, we're talking Jake Friend. We're talking Sydney Roosters. And that never happens on this show. I know this is an outlier, so you're just going to have to put up with it for this brief moment. But there has been calls, gentlemen, for Jake Friend to move into retirement. I guess in the last couple of seasons, he has sustained a few injuries, notably the last season in particular. He had two major ones. I believe it was a torn bicep and a broken arm or a broken wrist, broken forearm.
Yeah.
Pretty nasty stuff, but I guess it's rugby league and it happens. Now, following those injuries, Friend himself has actually hit back at that suggestion, though. He labelled the calls grossly exaggerated. But I'm going to put it out to the table here. Is Jake Friend's time almost up, or should he push on? We'll start with you, Xander.
They're awkward injuries, but I don't think they're career-ending injuries. They're, like, I mean, we mentioned a few...
like if you'd fractured your penis, you're probably going to go, that's a 4 or 5 year thing. Maybe that's going to end my career.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Peter Wallace and was it Frizzell? They both ruptured testicles and they've kept on playing. So.
Yeah.
This is I'm aghast that I don't know this, but a ruptured testicle. I know Brett Kamali had this as well. What's the medical science behind this? I feel like I need to throw this to you, Murray. What is involved in a ruptured testicle other than extreme pain?
That was going to be my answer.
I mean, it just sounds so fucking horrible. You almost don't want to investigate.
There is a great story of the All Blacks, I think, in the 70s. One of the was it Colin Meads or something? One of these famous All Blacks had a testicle rucked out in a game.
I love the idea of it being rucked out.
And he played until the finish of the match. He just kept playing. So, you have to imagine there must have been a testicle just lying on the pitch.
And that's back when they were playing for no money as well.
Yeah. Well, in New Zealand they were playing for something. But
Yeah, I'm just trying to put myself in that mall and just seeing what I believe to be a testicle rolling on the ground. As the opposition, do I stomp on it? Or do I let someone know?
We want to limit this man's ability to breed and make more All Blacks.
That's right. It's a long-term stomp.
Pick it up and throw it into the crowd.
Yeah, do a Maloney. But
I just want to know, if you do have if you lose a testicle from such extreme pain, would you be getting phantom pain for a long time?
that, identical twins. Exactly. Like if it's been separated from the body, if you were to punch, or I don't know why you'd punch the testicle. It seems really odd. But if you were, would the actual host person be hurt by that? Murray, I have no medical expertise whatsoever, but I'm going to say yes.
I'm more curious. You seem to have an odd obsession of stomping, punching testicles. Is there something you need to tell us?
So back to Jake Friend.
I was abused. I had a rough childhood, but that's for after the show. We'll make that an Easter egg in the show a bit later. But look, you're right. It's a great segue. Well, it's not really. Back to Jake Friend, but we'll use it anyway. Now, is this a lot of this talk down? I'm just going to throw a theory out here that a lot of this talk might be down to Sam Verrills having a great season in replacing Friend. Obviously, if we had someone that didn't come in and do as good a job as him, I don't imagine this kind of talk would be about. Is that a fair call?
I assume it's completely just, getting rid of Blake Ferguson for cocaine. It's the same sort of thing. It's just Uncle Nick trying to save himself $1 or two. And when I heard that there was any sort of a chance that Jake Friend might be shopped around with Roosters taking up some dollars, I was thinking Manly should be jumping on him because we don't really have a hooker right now.
You have a great team, but not necessarily a really established number 9. Although I have heard Nick Politis say that he'd want Jake Friend there forever. I think he's one of those. He's in the inner sanctum of the mob, essentially, who could do no wrong. There's 3 or 4 players in there. I don't think that the club wants to move him on. I think a lot of these voices are probably coming from the outside. As a diehard Roosters fan, Xander, would you like to see Jake Friend moved on at any point? I know you're a fan of Verrills.
No, I think you want him. I mean, as Verrills develops, he's not the full product just yet. So I think you want you want Friend around for a few more years. And I don't think his injuries have been that bad. I've seen plenty of players come back from worse. We've sort of mentioned Anthony Minicello with his back problems, which are much more career limiting, and he came back and had a stellar back end.
I mean, how important is your back, though, really?
Well, they also don't seem like systemic injuries in terms of stuff that's going to recur or caused by an underlying problem. It just seems like shit happens.
Yeah. Like Foran's hamstrings, for example.
Exactly. Or Tommy's hamstrings.
Yeah, which we hope's not a theme going forward, particularly as a Blues fan.
I'm more just hoping Tommy is more like a young Tedesco.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he just needed to kind of
Blues
grow
fan,
into
I'm
his
hoping
body.
that as well. How good was he?
Now, we did put this out to Twitter. Should Jake Friend retire at the end of the 2020 season?
82.5%?
You know what? It's so close. 81.1% said, yes, he should retire.
At 30? What?
Yeah, I know. Incredible, right?
It's just because he's had one injury-interrupted year.
Can I just put this out there? I also think a part of this, and I don't know if it's my paranoid tricolour conspiratorial view here, but because obviously we have been the yardstick, is that people just want to see a great player move on? Do you reckon it's just wanting to see the Roosters weakened by having Jake Friend moved out? Maybe this is where it's coming from a little bit too.
Played a grand total of 2 hours last year and they still won the premiership.
But what a couple of hours they were.
I mean, in the end, a bunch of teams have had chances to go back-to-back, Manly included, in the last 10, 15 years, and it just didn't happen. The Roosters are simply the team that made it happen. It's not like you were super dominant all year, but they've shown that they're the real deal by being able to do it. If they can do it without Jake Friend, which they've done, wait and see how they go next year, but I don't think they should move him on.
Well, Verrills definitely has a big future, so I'd hope it would be one of those situations a bit like Cronk working with the halves, this kind of moving on to the next generation. I mean, he's only 29 years old. He's definitely got another 3-year contract in him, I think.
Could you imagine Verrills at the Sharks, the amount of hype he'd be getting right now?
I know. It's so true, isn't it?
They'd all be dead set, dropping their load over him every time he touched the ball. Like they did over Jaden Brayley briefly, and now they're all, he's gone. Yeah, he sucks. He's terrible. Get rid of him.
And there's also the other Brayley, which is he's got a really different body type to Jaden.
He's the better one.
He's the better one, yeah. I don't want to drift onto your club too much, but I will anyway. No, I was very impressed with Manly this year.
Oh, I thought you were about to say I was a Sharks fan.
No. I was going to move on to Manly. Could you see yourself maybe snaffling a player like a Friend or a Verrills if the opportunity came available? Would Manly be in the hunt?
Oh, I would like to hope so, given the situation with Fainu, and I don't think he's going to be back, honestly. We should be looking to sign someone. I'm personally of the opinion that if we don't sign anyone, Cade Custer's the guy to be hooker for us. But
is that just based on his name? He's got the fucking coolest name. It sounds like a weird superhero.
It is a cool name.
Sounds like a Confederate general, doesn't it?
That's more based on the fact that he's a good defender. He tackles hard, he runs hard, and he's got a good short kicking game and a good pass. So it sounds like a hooker to me.
Yeah, you're right. And he's a solid unit, isn't he? For someone who's just coming into NRL.
And he's kind of shaped similarly to Fainu. He's probably a little taller than the average hooker. And strong, so he'll play a similar game, so he wouldn't have to change our style around too much. So,
well, I certainly hope he stays. And for what it's worth, I think a lot of this talk about him being injury prone is a bit bullshit. When you compare him to other players that we've already mentioned, like Foran, for example, who I like as a player, but clearly his body is letting him down. He's sort of made of a collection of glue and tissue paper or something at the moment.
Yeah, that injury in that New Zealand test was just bizarre. Like, it looked like nothing happened at all.
Yeah, he fell over.
Foran's impressive as a player, less impressive as a parent.
Less impressive as a card player, apparently.
Yes, allegedly, mate.
Allegedly.
But look, you can almost even make a comparison within our own team. You could almost argue Luke Keary is more injury prone than Jake Friend, right? Because he's had, outside of the head knocks, he's also had a number of injuries to, ankles.
He's not the biggest bloke on the field, is
he? No,
he's
tiny and he's tough.
It's incredible that he's able to play, the way he does, like the lack of fear he shows when he runs at the line, given that he looks like he weighs 45 kilos.
Not dissimilar to Kieran Foran in terms of that aspect.
Mind you, even Kieran Foran, he really put his body on the line, but he wasn't tiny, right? Like, he's still a strong bloke.
Yeah, definitely different frames there, but
he was a I always think about him like being coming through the New Zealand system, playing in probably South Auckland with basically just wall-to-wall islanders, he would have had to have been tough as nails to make it through that system.
You have to grow up fast there,
Yeah.
I think.
To be fair, he actually lived in Asquith for
Did he?
most of his life.
Okay, right.
Yeah, isn't he? His dad's now the CEO of Air New Zealand, isn't he?
Oh, he is too, isn't he? Yeah,
I think he comes from a fairly
He does. He
well-off
comes from a
corporate.
well-heeled family, but I always figured that the rugby league system over there is basically just it's all Polynesians, right?
Yeah,
He probably just wasn't good enough to be a rugby player.
Yeah, in that
Or too
environment.
small or whatever. He comes from the North Shore, rich parents, Kiwi. You figure he probably wanted to be a rugby player, but for whatever reason couldn't cut it.
Yeah, and a very good kick, and he's very good with the checkbook, apparently. He can whip that out in record speed. Do you think there's a bit of a perception issue here with Jake Friend as well? Because why do people think he's old? Because to me, he doesn't look old.
He's been around quite a while.
He has been
That's
around
the
for
thing.
a while. Yeah.
It just feels like he's been around
Yeah.
forever, right? When I actually
like
went...
Sonny Bill Williams, he was because he was like playing top level NRL at 17. By the time he, was like in his late 20s, people thought he'd been around.
Did
forever.
Jake Friend start young? Because it just feels like he's been around quite
Yeah,
a while.
I think he did. Oh, yeah, I think he started with a blaze of controversy, but I think he debuted at 18.
So he was he your hooker then in the 2013 grand final?
Yes.
Because I've, of course, never watched that game again.
Yes, he was. That was the one good game that Mitchell Pearce played. I remember it well.
So was he there? Was he your hooker in 2010?
I believe he was.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he was. In
Yeah,
20. I watched that grand final on
So
the
there
lead
you
up
go.
to it.
Yeah, that'd be about the start of
Yeah.
when
so
he was...
he's been there the whole decade.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
does feel like he's been around a while.
He's a bit of an institution. So people have got a wrong, a sort of poor perception of how old he is. Maybe that's his problem. Is there a way he can put out some positive PR and start acting like a younger person?
Well, all he has to do is get a face mask of Matt Moylan, and then he'll be eternally young.
That's right. Matt Moylan, the baby-faced... I used to be the baby-faced assassin. Now he's just the baby-faced fuckwit because he can't play footy anymore. Poor bastard. But, at one point he was good. So that could be it. Maybe just do a lot more Oil of Ulan ads. Try reverse the aging process, the 7 signs of aging.
Apparently it's the 80s because there's still oil in the
Can I just say this for the record? Cosmetics, not my area. Just reached for a reference and you're right.
I had no idea what it was.
No, with that beautiful skin.
Yeah, I know. I'm shocked myself. Maybe he just needs to start communicating with the public through younger forums like TikTok.
Snapchat, yeah.
Yes, well, that's too old now, mate.
Oh, it is
No,
old,
that's so 2017.
Maybe in every interview he should just start saying things like bay and lit.
Now, I know what lit means, but what the fuck's the other one?
Bay, I found out
Short for
just the other-
baby. Yeah.
No.
Oh, no?
Incorrect. It's an fuck, I got no idea. That thing.
if anyone knows at home, write into PO Box 544. More after this.
Edit that out.
Welcome back to the Voluntary Tackle. Well, it's December, so naturally we're talking about State of Origin because we're sort of on the eve of the eve of the eve of talking about Origin too early, aren't we? So I feel like this is going to go really well. And of course, so the NRL in their wisdom have announced train-on squads for both of the states. Well, each state have announced them. So we thought we might have a little bit of a chat about all the people who will probably never play State of Origin because a lot of them have been named. In fact, Brad Fittler has announced a mammoth squad of 64 men. So essentially everyone with an Australian driver's licence has been selected for New South Wales.
64.
64
Jesus
people.
Christ.
I mean, it's 5 short of being a nice number.
Exactly right, mate. It's 64 too many?
Well, I'm unsure why they kept the squad so small, honestly. I mean, if
What
you-
number would you have liked
They
to
were
have
looking
seen?
for a college football team. Like, what do they have, a squad of 75 in college football in the States?
My theory is if you really want someone like Latrell Mitchell to perform his best in the squad, you just need to let him know that there's a Blake Ashford breathing down his neck ready to take his spot.
Maybe that's the strategy, though, right? Is they're going to have, like, special teams and, like, kickoff reception teams and all kinds of stuff. You know?
That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? So you go Clint Gutherson, like you're on water.
I'd say
And
if you put some air quotes, Gutherson could be on the special team.
Very true. I used to like Gutho at one
Few
point.
players could fit on the special team. I'm sure.
Now, look, guys, we're going to start with Queensland. Now, Holmes has obviously been added to the squad after, I don't know if you remember, he tried to pretend to be an NFL
Speaking
player.
of American football, yeah.
Exactly right, which is an obvious choice. But they've also named a few other new faces. Parramatta hooker Reid Mahoney, the Raiders' big tough forward Corey Horsburgh, am I getting that name right? I hope I am. And Sharks winger Ronaldo Mulatalo. Murray, is there anything that Queensland can do? These are 3 new faces. Probably not going to be enough. Kevin Walters, his job's probably on the line here.
Well, I think if you get someone like, what's his name, the coach whisperer, if he wants to just improve his resume, he could just sign back on with Queensland, maybe do a sniping course, take out Teddy and Tommy and a few others, and he could then be able to put his, a tick to his resume.
I love it. So become overtly militaristic and just start taking people out literally.
It does seem like a Queensland thing. They do love their guns there.
They do indeed, and they do just shoot people like cattle regularly on a day-to-day basis. Well, that could be one. I like that. And Charlie Stubbs, we should probably talk about him, the coach whisperer, because obviously he was very successful up until 2019 because he predicted a whitewash in 2016 and 2013. And I believe he was unlucky in his early childhood as well, from what I understand. He had a tough life. So is it possible to come back and be the coach whisperer after you've failed, is my point. So in 2020, if he were to stay on with Kevin Walters and say, look, I know we'll forget about last year, but now I really mean it. I mean, it doesn't hold true anymore, does it?
His tactics are things like, we're not going to call them the Blues because that has psychological weight. We're just going to refer to them as New South Wales. He did this with Michael Cheika and the All Blacks. He had Cheika believing this crap, and he was calling them New Zealand at all the press conferences to the point where it became a joke for the New Zealand press, and they tried to trick him into saying All Blacks. Then they just went and got their asses kicked. So those sorts of things, I hope they keep using them.
Yeah. Only thing it seemed to do was sort of apply pressure to themselves, I thought, because they had to think about media conferences in a different way, like it was a game of taboo or something. Like they couldn't say a certain word.
Thinking's not really the forte of Queenslanders in general.
No, you're right.
Rugby league players.
It's just been angry and frothing at the mouth.
I just love the idea, though, that after winning 10 out of 11 series, the word Blues was apparently psychologically so damaging to them that they wanted to avoid saying it.
That's how much they wanted it, mate. That's how much they fucking love Origin. So they definitely we think this is too early to talk about Origin. Definitely north of the border. They've been talking about this ever since Game 3 concluded. So we're not on our own. Now, the people missing from the usual squad for Queensland include Will Chambers, who's moved across to Japanese rugby, and Matt Gillette, who I think broke his neck several times and decided it's not worth the risk anymore. They're not, that's kind of big game experience, I guess, they're going to be missing. They've got an infusion of young guys. For me, they're right for the picking for a 3 in a row. Am I right there?
I think a big question mark for Queensland is going to be Val Holmes.
Yep.
And where do they play him? Because if they want to have Val and Ponga at the same time, Val shows any early season form. I think his peak fullbacking was better than Ponga's peak fullbacking so far. Yeah. So you'd want to have him in there. But what's your best squad? So I personally am of the opinion that the best squad, if Val gets his form back, would be Ponga at 14.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
so knock him out of the run-on.
I do think so because...
Just have him as a utility.
Yeah, I mean, Val's good on the wing. He has been very good for Queensland, but if his best position is fullback, you should pick your best players. And someone like Felt is actually a genuinely good winger.
Why has Felt never got a look in? Does anyone know why that is? Has he even been added to this squad? I know we do zero research, but I don't remember seeing his name. We'll check that later. But
he's probably slept with the wrong coach's daughter or something like
that.
Maybe he doesn't know the Queensland song. I don't know.
Yeah, what is that song again? Hail Hitler. I forget the rest.
I assume it's just the Australian national anthem, and maybe he refused to sing.
No,
maybe that's it.
You know what the funny thing about the Queensland anthem is that it because they dominated that Kangaroos squad so much for so long. Apparently, they banged that out after the 2013 World Cup win. Pissed off all the Blues players because they sung that in the Kangaroos jersey, and it was just the Queensland players singing it as they were waiting.
Well, that's a cunt act, isn't it?
Yeah, it was led by Cam Smith. So if there's any other, if we needed any more reasons to hate Cam Smith,
yeah, that's right. And I don't think we do need any more, do we, Mario?
I need no more reasons.
Look, I know we've discussed this once before on the podcast, but I think for the benefit of a rehash here, can you very quickly tell us the kernel of why you don't like Cameron Smith?
There's too many reasons.
If you had to put one above the others.
It's his grubby on-field stuff, which Queenslanders love overlooking and apologising for, or simply just saying it doesn't exist. And of course, it's hard to get a still of someone chicken winging someone, but you try and show them a photo and they say,
show the GIF.
Is that all you've got? You've only got a couple of things. Oh, I'm sure every player's done that. No, fuck off. There's so many examples of when he's done stuff clearly intentionally, and everything there's an excuse for. He's just one of these smarmy pricks that would have been, team captain in school, even though he wasn't the biggest guy, but he probably paid the biggest guy to look after him. So he could go around being a Josh Reynolds and just being an absolute dick face to people. But because he's a Queenslander, he gets away with it.
So I don't like Cam
wait.
Smith,
What do you really think?
Sorry, mate. No, I was just going to say, I don't like him either, but I've never heard it put so articulately.
Yeah, no, wasn't it? Almost like you've thought about this before, Mario, I get the feeling. What was his excuse, by the way, when he was basically wingnutting that guy this year with the ears? I think his excuse was I was
Rubbish
trying
on
to
the
pull his
face.
collar over his head or something. I mean, it's an odd way to pull a collar over, isn't
That's
it?
a dick move, though.
Yeah. And that's on the lower end of his offences,
I was
really.
grabbing him by the collar. Jerseys don't have collars anymore. You know what I mean?
That's why he went for the ears, mate, to be fair.
And I know if I'm grabbing a collar, I definitely twist a few times as well. That's just standard practice.
Yeah, exactly. I adjust my collar as if I was trying to perforate some eardrums. I mean, that's just a regular thing that people do. Now, the other little question I have for this is, and I'm happy that they're there, but why the hell have Dylan Napa and Jared Wallace still maintained their position in this squad? For me, their form's dropped off the face of the earth.
I feel like Napa was pretty good at the end of the year for Canterbury.
Canterbury actually
Last
finished...
couple of weeks, maybe,
Well,
don't
the
you?
last 6 weeks, really.
Didn't they win 6, 7 in a row?
Yeah,
or
they won
something?
6 of 8, I think it was.
Yeah, we're going to talk about them actually later in the potty, the Dogs. So you think that that's enough for him to deserve? I mean, he's let them. He's let down that Maroons. That's true. He's let down that Maroons jersey a few times though. For me,
if they can keep picking Nate Miles as long as they did, then Dylan Napa deserves another 10 years.
to be fair, he had a huge head and had a great advantage in the scrum. He could just punch his way through a wall of people.
He took a punch well as well.
He certainly did. Change the rules for the worse. Actually,
Is Darius Boyd in the...
We wish.
now, if for example that Queensland were going to go on to lose in 2020, do we think Kevin Walters' time is done?
Yeah, he wouldn't last another series loss, I don't think.
I'm hopeful that they win game 1 so that he can get signed for another 3 years.
Yeah. They have a thumping win in the first game and they blow their load and pay out money.
Is that how they celebrate still?
That's the Queensland way.
I tell you, and the
part of that
Queensland song at the same time. That's the crescendo at the end.
Yeah, they do that, then they prepare a few votes for Pauline Hanson for the next election and they move on.
I don't know why I want to mention the word Bukaki, but I'm not going to do it this time. Now we're going to move.
Last episode.
Exactly. Kevin Walters, if he ends up getting the boot, who's the obvious candidate to replace him? Is there a chance that, for example, Mal Meninga gets wheeled back into the throne? I know Wayne Bennett wants the role. Are these the kind of candidates that Queensland might put in?
I kind of assume Wayne Bennett will retire there.
Yeah, right. You just move in there and fuck off Clubland. Yeah, that could be a thing. I mean, he definitely wants it.
Part of me would like to see Wayne come back and coach a really shit Queensland team against an ascendant Blues side, just so we can smash the myth of
Wayne Bennett. Just tarnish his legacy in the game.
Yeah, Wayne Bennett and Mel Meninga, actually. Either one of them would work. I
Yes.
think. Mel Meninga probably more so.
Yeah, I'd prefer Mal actually for that scenario.
Yeah, because Mal Meninga is actually not a good coach, whereas Wayne Bennett actually he is a good coach.
Surely his efforts for the Australian team have started to prove that he's not a good coach.
You'd hope so, but
Chris
it doesn't
Anderson
seem
was
to
able
be.
coach the Australian side back in the day.
Yeah.
So.
And then mind you could say the same about Wayne Bennett with his efforts for England.
Yeah.
Is he even really trying there? I get the feeling he's just like, I need to keep a profile in the international game because I want to coach Australia or
he's a
coach
double
Queensland.
agent and he's
Yeah, exactly.
make them bad.
Like I've been
Actually, that makes a lot more sense. Jackson Hastings. I mean, come on.
I've been on the
Man
record.
of Steel, Jackson Hastings.
Man of Steel. Fucking hell. I've been on the record as not being a big fan of the Poms in general, but I felt embarrassed for them with the coaching decisions of Wayne Bennett in that series recently. It was just fucking nuts.
I'm a fan of the Techno Viking, but starting him at wing was an interesting decision.
What the fuck were they thinking?
And Tim Glasby at fullback? What the fuck was that about? No, he's been prone to make some very bizarre positional decisions. And look, the other candidate that might come to mind, because I know he doesn't want to be at the Cowboys, Paul Green. Is he a chance of potentially
He wouldn't
taking?
be bad.
I think he's
he's not an awful coach, right?
Well, it hasn't been good the last couple of years.
No, but I mean, maybe the Queensland thing might suit him more. I don't know.
Allegedly personnel issues, though, up at North Queensland. And if you're going to have personnel issues at Clubland, most of what State of Origin coaching is apparently about, from what we are told, is man management.
Yeah. That's very true. And he's apparently 4 or 5 of the guys fucking hate him. In fact, Ethan Lowe, did you guys keep up with that story? So when he got moved on from the Cowboys, I don't think Lowe was very happy about it, went to Souths, and basically he was leaking stories to the media about all the issues that were happening behind closed doors at
Really?
the Cowboys. And all they were willing to say is, we think it's a disgruntled player who's gone to Sydney. And you're like, there's only one of them.
I always thought that was a strange one. Ethan Lowe was always too good to be in reserve grade, and yet that's where they kept putting him at
I know.
Queensland. So they're failing, and yet putting him in reserve grade. So
There had to be. I think maybe the crux of where at first the rot started might have been with Ethan Lowe.
on the topic of Wanye Bennett, I'm wondering if he were to take Latrell Mitchell and start him at fullback, and it was a massive failure, could you then see him perhaps, tweeting about windmills? Because he'd be just going full Trump at that point.
There's every chance that might happen.
I'd like to see if he'd sort of cop to a mistake like Nathan Brown style with Kalen Ponga, where he put him at 5'8", like putting Latrell at fullback and it just, as you say, crashing and burning. I mean, because Nathan Brown basically just went, yeah, it was a bad idea, with Kalen Ponga, he just thought it might work, didn't.
Well, I think that's where he wanted to play, right? I think Ponga sees himself
he
as a
sees
six.
himself as a six, and he was terrible. I have a sneaking suspicion that Ponga is
A wanker?
that, and yeah, I think he's got a lot less promise in him than people think.
He's got a step.
Yeah.
He's got the Chuavasa-Shek step, and he's got a better passing game than RTS does, but I actually don't think he reads the play of the game the way someone like RTS does, so I don't think he's as good a player, despite having perhaps more to his game with the nice cutout passes. I still think he's got he's got a bit more laziness to him as well. I don't think he hits the right positions. It doesn't mean he can't be a great player. Ponga could well be the greatest fullback to ever play the game, but at the moment, I don't think the evidence is there to back that up.
He seems like a player that doesn't have the work ethic, right?
It could be an attitude thing, that might come along with youth and being told so young that you're the best. Yeah. That can be a little bit corrosive as well. And we should remember he is young, so he's still developing the finer points to his game. But we know he has the natural talent. But as you said, staying engaged for 80 minutes, that typically is something that comes with time.
Well, could you imagine Kalen Ponga being like the Trbojevic brothers and, spending his off time coaching the local kids team?
Yeah.
You can't imagine
no way.
that. And not every player needs to be that type of person who does that, but that is obviously why everyone loves the Turbo brothers. But it just says that they love the sport and they love playing and they're going to appreciate every opportunity they get.
100%.
They're dedicated to an art, effectively, right?
Yeah, but that's what fans
Yeah.
want. I know we all have this myth of loyalty that to a large degree doesn't exist in modern sport because of the money involved, and that's understandable when you really think about it. But you still want... I don't care if a player isn't loyal to my club forever, but...
You want them to be committed while they're there.
Exactly. Yeah. Someone like... The reason Manly fans hate Anthony Watmo is because he immediately started rubbishing the club the moment he left, whereas we've never had an issue with Clint Gutherson because he didn't want to leave. He was told you can't stay, and then he's been a gentleman the rest of his career so far.
And one thing probably should be pointed out is what a rare commodity those Trbojevic brothers are.
Oh, for sure.
Like you're right. I mean, you're 100% on point there. But in terms of setting that standard, I can see that name dominating the sport for the next 10 years. And to have them all at one club, it could be very special, I have to say. But yeah, that would be the I guess the way to lead a young career forward.
If any listeners of the show have kids, then they probably watch Bluey. And Bluey is a show where parents get parent envy of the dad called Bandit because he is the perfect dad. And I kind of feel like we don't have to be like Bandit. We just have to see what he does and aspire to that standard. And that's what the Trbojevic brothers are. They're basically, Bandit from Bluey.
I love it. I've never thought that metaphor was coming our way, and I'm a richer man for it, that's for sure. Can we tee up some Bluey over this side after the show? Thank you very much.
I'll get it on my phone.
If you don't mind. Look, we should probably move to the south of the border as well when we're talking about origin squads. Now, we alluded earlier that Brad Fittler had named 64 people, several members of his own family, which is a bit
Maybe
weird.
he's just a fan of that song. Will you still love me when I'm 64?
Well, I wouldn't put that past Freddie to actually base his selections on an old classic tune.
Why not? So, next he can just say he'll only select people who are Beatles fans or something like that.
That's right. Okay, so we've got he's actually split this into 3 tiers, which I don't know if this is something that's been he's done before because, again, we do very little research here. But he's got a normal
I don't think
squad.
Freddie does much research either somehow.
It's hard to say with him, isn't it?
It's really hard.
He either does none or he does too much. Yeah. It's one of those. So he's got an emerging blues tier, and he's also got a future blues, and which I'm going to throw to you in a sec, Murray, about that, because contained in that is Ben Trebojevic, and I know you have a little bit more background on him than us. But in the emerging squad, we've got the likes of Curtis Scott, Bronson Cherry, Ruben Garrick, Ryan Pappenhausen, who I didn't actually realise. I should have known this. I just assumed he was a Queenslander.
No,
I
he's a
figured
Tiger.
Yeah, there you go.
Balmain Jr.
Yeah, I had to look that up. I went, that's fucking amazing.
I was-
I'm so happy about that.
No, I sussed that out immediately when I saw him tearing it up for the Storm. I'm like, oh, please don't be a Queenslander.
So surely, I mean, there's a few names I've already mentioned there. There's also Sam Verrills. There's Campbell Graham. I mean, this is a fantastic future that you're painting there. Pappenhausen, I mean, to me, that's a very exciting prospect. He has to be a chance of potentially busting in this year, doesn't he? I know he's early in his
A couple
career.
of injuries, I'd want him on the wing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a gun.
But in that future Blues squad, Mario, the much hyped Ben Trebojevic, he did an interview during the week, which was quite a cute interview, actually. He was asked who was his favourite Trebojevic brother, and he was very quick to answer Tom. And when he asked why, he said, well, because Jake's just too intense. He's always on my case. He's saying, don't eat that. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And he said, Tom's a lot more laid back. So he's an outside back. He seems to be a lot more in the mould of a Tom.
Back row.
Yeah, right. Okay. So is he like a larger Tom Trebojevic? Is that the sense I'm getting?
He kind of is. I think he's not quite as tall, but a little bit more solid for his age.
Right.
Like Tommy was a twig at that age.
Yeah, I know. He really was a beanpole.
Ben shows a lot of promise, and he's been playing really well. He's had some injuries, so it's been him and Albert Hopewadi sort of as ready to dominate the Manly outside backs, and they're the two obvious names that sort of you think Manly when you think those surnames at the moment. Yeah,
you could have conceivably just have a squad of Hopowadis and Trebojevics, and that's it.
I feel like there'd be a bit of a divide in the club there. Really.
It could well be.
There's certainly some dickheadedness in the Hopewadi gene pool.
In that tribe.
Strangely, though, like there's a real convergence even within the gene pool, right? Like, because there's guys like Will who
Mild-mannered.
Yeah, mild-mannered,
Yeah.
like sweet as pie, and then obviously his dad who is not.
Not that we'll say anything further on that.
Oh, no, let's do. The guy's a psycho.
Actually, I have a funny story about about his dad.
Oh, please, could you lay it on us?
Probably not for this.
You tease. Yeah. That's all right. Everyone who's on Patreon will get that one. Sonny Bill Williams, of now Toronto Wolfpack fame, came out and had some rather scornful words for the Chinese government. He came out in support of the Uyghur Muslims that have been entered into, inverted commas, re-education camps, I think they're called, over there. Now, we're seeing a lot more of this, sort of sports people getting involved politically and having a go at China. Seems well placed. But as an NRL podcast, I thought it was pertinent for us to decide who would win in a fight between Sonny Bill Williams and the Chinese government. Now, I've actually gone to the trouble of putting this out to Twitter as well, so hold on to your hats.
It's a scientific poll that we've got.
Basically, this is an intellectual endeavour. Yeah. Don't think of it as anything else.
That's what this podcast always is.
Absolutely, mate. I've stick to that vehemently, even when inevitably it degenerates into some kind of criminal courtroom somewhere. I know it will eventually. Now, is there any chance that Sonny Bill Williams can take on the Chinese government? Could he lobby them to be a little bit more liberal than they are now? I mean, the man is very successful. Code hopper, played 1 million sports, been successful in all of them. Or is this question so ridiculous you'd rather pass?
Well, I would just wonder, is it simply that he saw what happened when LeBron James came out sort of defending China? Did he just think, well, that didn't go well for LeBron, so I'm going to be really awesome and just take the opposite approach? But I'm not. I just think Sonny Bill's a bit of a mental midget, and I'm not sure it's really. And I think politics.
What do you really think?
Yeah, politics aren't for him.
Yeah. Well, that's actually, I guess, it does feed into the broader question here: is should players be coming embroiled in political discussions, or should they stick to their sports?
How deep are we going here?
Yeah.
Because
mate, we can deep dive as long as we don't talk about John Hopewadi. Obviously,
I mean, it's a good cause. I wish people in the general world had given a shit about these Muslims a while ago, because they've been prisoners there and forced into effective slavery for a while now.
Yep.
And it has been known, but I guess not widely publicised. So in his defence, he may have genuinely not known. He probably does exist in some sort of a bubble in his situation.
He's too busy winning trophies.
It stemmed from that soccer player in the Premier League, Ozil, who was a Turkish bloke, Ozil Murhad or something. I can't remember. He got into a
He
whole
has
lot
a
of...
surname? No, it's Mesut Ozil.
Mesut Ozil?
Ozil's his surname.
Mesut Ozil, yeah. So he got into a lot of shit for criticising them because obviously the Premier League's biggest TV market is China. The kicker, of course, with that case was that bloke used to take selfies with Erdogan and, you know...
Another man of great moral repute.
So if you're going to cozy up to dictators who imprison journalists and your opposition political opponents, then maybe you're not really well placed to make those comments.
Be consistent.
But with Sonny Bill Williams, it's a pretty different one. Well, first of all, he hasn't cozied up to any other dictator, so he's got some cred on that front at least.
That we know about.
But similarly, the Super League isn't really a big pull TV-wise in China. So there's not really any pressure the Chinese can bear back on Sonny Bill Williams. He's not going to have much success. It's really just going to be his...
He's got a free shot.
I feel like they're not going to give a shit.
No.
So he's free to do it.
I mean, a certain side of politics might suggest then that he was just virtue signalling because his opinion has no weight of any sort there. I am not saying that. I think good on him for having that opinion and for going out there and saying it. There's not really any, as you say, there's not really blowback on him for doing it, but I don't see why that matters. He still has an audience among Western society that will pay attention to his words, and if what he says helps bring attention to a good cause, which is, getting rid of slavery, then good on him.
I like the fact that you had to distance yourself from your own words there. I really did enjoy that. But let's take an example. Say Dally Cherry Evans. Would you like to see him take a more active role in liberalising Uzbekistan, for example? Or would you prefer he focus on his last tackle options? That's what I really want to know.
The problem with Daly Cherry Evans is he's so widely hated by everyone who's not a Manly fan that him offering his opinions on Chinese dictatorships are probably just going to make most rugby league fans become in favour of China.
Yeah, you would
true,
get the weirdest people who follow the NRL suddenly supporting internment camps in China, which actually be really interesting as a social experiment.
It's called the
Cherry Evans supports is against the Uyghur internments. Well, I'm for it.
Yeah, fuck you, Cherry.
The Uyghurs deserve it.
Now, weirdly, we did put this out to Twitter, so I will give the results.
We put everything out to Twitter.
Who would win in a fight between Sonny Bill Williams and the Chinese government? It makes sense as a question.
Did you tag the Chinese government in this post?
I was CCP.
I did, and I've just noticed I have some pretty suspicious malware popping up on the screen. I'm sure it's not a problem. We said 57.5% said China would win. 30% said Sonny Bill Williams, and 12.5% thought it might be a draw. I'm not sure what a draw would look like in that context.
I don't know what that says about our listenership, that 57% is the only... Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's face it, they've got the weight of resources behind them, haven't they? I mean, as good as Sonny Bill is.
I'm just disappointed that you've missed the opportunity here to get some real numbers on this poll. All you have to do is hashtag Sun Yang in the tweets, and you can guarantee that about 50,000 Chinese people with 0 followers each would have
Mate,
at
you would have.
I'm not here to shamelessly leverage anything for the show. Integrity is at the very centre of what we do here.
You are a Roosters fan after all.
Exactly.
I want to try that, actually. Take up Mario's suggestion and just at Sun Yang in there, and maybe a couple of other famous Chinese athletes, and just see how many hours it takes until your Twitter account is posting Chinese propaganda in Chinese.
By the end of the show, we'll all be towing the military line in China. Now, look,
or be in an internment camp.
Exactly. No, re-education, mate. Let's get the propaganda right. Look, I didn't think there was going to be a lot of steam in that, but I enjoyed that as a bit of a sideshow to Aimon's thought bubble. Now, I don't know if anyone's had a chance to read my brief, because it was pretty ridiculous. It might seem ostensibly ridiculous, by the way. Not that I think it is.
Golden headgear?
It's called the golden headgear. Listeners, sit down, maybe take a few puffs of a cigar, have a brandy, and just really absorb this, because it's a cracker of an idea. I would like to see every game have at least one golden headgear. Actually, it'll be one per team. Making this up on the fly. Where essentially the person wearing the golden headgear everything he does, whether it is a try or he kicks a goal or a field goal, is worth double points. I just think it might actually mix up the strategies a little bit. So, for example, and it's drawn out randomly, by the way, so before the game's played, an independent person draws out, say it's, if for your team, it might be Fanua Blake, right? Suddenly, his tries are worth double. So now everyone's trying to get him to score. He doesn't cross the stripe as often as the outside backs, obviously. So the whole game would change. Could you imagine they go, wow, we were ahead by 8 points. Every time Fanua Blake got the ball, though, it would be panic stations because he could potentially steal back the lead. I think it's genius, but I'm willing to throw it out to the floor.
Look, I think if you're going to do this, we've got to do it properly.
Okay.
So
I'm not a fan of that, but go on.
if we're rewarding, we can't just reward field goals and tries because then it's just luck of the draw of whoever gets field goals. They'll just start taking them from everywhere.
Okay.
So we need to also be rewarding other little things in the game. Say you kick a 40-20.
Yep.
To do an extra reward for that, perhaps the winger who failed to stop the ball going out, has to have his leg in a bear trap for the next 6 tackles.
Oh, well, this is good. I mean, I always love it when it goes in the sort of realms of corporal punishment, when people get physically...
I kind of feel like we're turning it into Mario Rugby or something at this
Well, that's
point.
why I'm here.
Super Mario Rugby.
And instead of all the annoying pop songs in between, here did it.
That's right.
There is actually I think it's a Wii Nintendo Olympics game out for the Tokyo Olympics next year, and they've got rugby sevens in it. It has all of these crazy things where you get power-ups and players can burst.
Fucking love it.
It.
I swear to God, I didn't shamelessly steal it from that concept. I will go and investigate. Out of interest, are the Russians banned from that game too?
They don't.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good to hear.
I want to know then if Cam Smith were playing with power ups, would
He's
he
already playing with power-ups.
Would he be throwing around red turtle shells at the other players?
And would someone be required to eat magic mushrooms? These are the kind of questions we need to ask.
Well, I mean, most Titans players wouldn't mind that.
I'd say they're doing it already. Allegedly, exactly. Xander, this is over to you, mate. I want you to interrogate this idea with all the seriousness it deserves.
I think the headgear makes it a little too explicit. I actually think you should make it the golden mouth guard. So
Okay.
you really have to look for it. It'll have players. It'll create misdirection in a way that the headgear, which is very visible, people will be looking for that little glint in the mouth guard to work out who they should be focusing their energy on.
I see.
So it should only be the person who has the golden gear.
So it'd be more
Maybe even
surreptitious
golden-
with you. So you
Yeah.
wouldn't know who the bonus guy is.
Or maybe golden underpants.
How
You have to
about in
dack them to know.
What if
Golden
in a
Mormon.
scrum they're swapping the mouth guard between people, and so you don't know that person's got it.
You
now?
could give your entire team, mono or something, but hey.
This went downhill fast. More after this. Welcome back to the Voluntary Tackle. We are previewing another team for 2020, and this time it's the Canterbury Bulldogs. Now, I guess you had a pretty shocking start to 2019, it has to be said. They lost a lot of games by some big margins, but as the season progressed and Kieran Foran's legs slowly withered and died, they actually gained some momentum in the back end and won a few games in a row, which a lot of people are saying is not a bad building block to potentially launch themselves into 2020. Criticism, I guess, there being that it's easier to win games in a row when the pressure valve is sort of being released and you're out of finals contention. I guess we'll start the critique for 2020 here. What are their chances? Have they had any major recruitments that we should know about? Have they got a snowball chance in hell?
No.
Okay, you're very straight to the point there, Mario. And what are you attributing that to, mate?
They're not going to win the wooden spoon. I think they are now too good for that. They've got some youngish players who are improving, so I see that they could finish around where they finished, but with an improved overall year. As you said, they had that run at the end, but I think from memory they did that in 2018 as well. They sort of finished pretty strong in the last half of the season, but it was because they were crap and people weren't taking them seriously.
Exactly. So there's always that factor.
I think they're better than they were, and I think there's reason for Bulldogs fans to have hope because there's players that show potential, but I don't think there's the players that they've got, there's no one enough who's just that next level. When Dallin Watene-Zelezniak is your fullback and he's a good player and he was quite good for them, but he's so far below a Tommy or an RTS or a Teddy that I just feel that most of their players are just that step down from competition at other clubs, and I don't think they have the best player in any position or even the top three player in any position. You've got your Lachlan
Yeah.
Lewises, who he shows promise and he's an interesting player to watch, but he's just an average halfback.
At the moment, at least, yeah.
And he might be better one day, but at the moment...
You're right. There's a lot of workman-like players in that team that when they click and they all play together, like they did at the back end of the year, they can cause some upsets and they've got plenty of heart, but it's...
They do play a bit like council workers or something at times to sort of sit around. There's times where they just sit around and go, we're on break.
Well, it's hard to carry Josh Jackson and Aiden Tolman in the same club.
Oh,
They
mate,
both-
Josh had a good year, mate. You have to
He
admit.
did. I mean, they're both good players at what they do, but it's hard to have two forwards in your team when you need go forward, two forwards that don't offer go forward.
Yeah,
It
they
just
lack a bit of
reduces their
dynamism.
options.
There's no
Yeah.
doubt about that. Now, as a Manly fan, do you feel like your club has some blood on its hands here with Des Hasler kind of leaving the Bulldogs in a bit of a state and obviously doing very well with Manly this year? Salary cap dramas have inhibited their opportunity to kind of recruit and that kind of thing. Do you think that's a factor in why they're struggling at the moment?
Lame. It's a lame.
That was all Raylene Castle's fault.
It's just a lame excuse. Every club has the same position, and if your salary cap's an issue, then just be more like the Roosters and do the bloody backroom deals properly. I mean,
Nice retort.
People want to abuse the Roosters for that, but the reality is, I respect them. If you can actually have the NRL believing that you've only got $18,000 or something stupid of TPAs, well, I've got some used cars I'd like to sell the NRL.
I think I hit a nerve there, Xander.
I'm not saying that to mock the Roosters. I'm
No,
saying
it's
that they're doing it right. I mean, if you want to, every club should be handing over brown paper bags to their players. Every single club.
Is that
should.
what you're advocating here on the show?
Oh, dead set. Just go all in. Clubs should be doing it properly. Parramatta tried, but they're just so utterly incompetent as a concept that they screwed it up completely.
They can't even do the paper bag
Parramatta
thing
didn't
right.
even intend to do it. I don't think they just couldn't keep their books.
They couldn't add up very
they
well.
just didn't use Excel right. They forgot to they forgot to add all the cells together in their sum field.
The people of Parramatta were just too busy focusing on how they can get the no vote to succeed, and they didn't focus on rugby league.
They needed it to happen. Now, I know we've talked about Kieran Foran a little bit earlier in the podcast, but for me last year when he was there for that very limited time,
He had a cracking final.
It actually showed what the Bulldogs can be if they have a genuinely good half. And you mentioned before, you got Marshall King and Lachlan Lewis, these type of guys that aren't bad. They're kind of promising type of players, but they're not the kind of players that can dominate right now. So I feel like with the Bulldogs, unless they have someone who can dominate in the halves, they're not going to be a threat anytime soon. And Foran's at least out for a third of the season, isn't he, with that injury?
Yeah.
So
Well, it was almost a full year, wasn't it? Because they had to do reconstructive surgery on their reconstructive surgery.
Well, I noticed he's flagged, and I don't know if he's going to be right or not, but he thinks he can get back by April or so. Or something
really?
like that. I mean, that might not be the case, but even by then, the damage might well and truly be done for the Dogs early in the season. They can't afford to have the same start as they had last year.
It's just the issue is once DWZ came on board, he was one of their obviously dominant players, and he was putting out the better numbers. But you'd look at their team, and on certain games, they might have got a few surprising wins, but Corey Haruiranara, Will Hopewadi, and Zelezniak, they just looked so much better than most of the players in that team who just didn't look first grade standard. They would just somehow cobble together a win. I don't think you can build an entire season around that play. You've got to be able to. You've got to sometimes be the front runner and be the team that other teams are worried. How do we beat them? No one's thinking that against the Dogs.
I agree with you. They're sort of like an incomplete puzzle, aren't they? They're a picnic missing a sandwich or a porno missing a German. It's just not the same thing as a normal NRL team. 80 minutes performance, Xander, you concerned about that?
You know what it kind of reminds me of? I mean, because this happened to them at the back end of 2018 as well, right? Like they had a good finish of the season. Everyone else thought they were going to do great. And it's you can see sides with sort of average-looking squads occasionally come out of the blocks or finish a season well. It's that ability.
Big shout out to the Dragons.
Yeah.
I was going to say the Titans.
I was going to say the Tigers of 2018. Right? Remember they came out of the blocks and they won I think their first 5 in a row or something. But they were playing every game like it was a semi-final, and you just knew that with the squad they had, they just weren't going to be able to sustain it over the season, and they just didn't. And they petered out, and they just couldn't keep it going. And I feel like the Dogs are a bit in that camp where they finished the last couple of seasons well, but having the ability to get their entire squad up that often to play effectively above themselves that much. It just makes them a middle of the table side.
Yeah, and as you said, lack of depth is an issue. And we actually brought it up before. I don't know if I've still got the tab here. We talked about who the new recruits would be for the Bulldogs. And they've got 3, so hang on to your hats. It's Joe Stimson, Dean Britt, and Sione Katoa. That's not really blowing my hair back as much as I thought it would.
I mean, Katoa is probably the only hooker in the comp that might be worse than Katoa plays for the Bulldogs, and it's Lycha.
I know what a battle that will be to see who can
wow.
not get the number 9.
I mean, just send them both to shoot shield or something because they're garbage.
Now, do you guys, even though they've obviously got their depth issues, are there players, and you've probably mentioned a couple already, Mario, but are there any players that you think will potentially have burst out years for them in 2020 that has been there already? I mean, for me, there's one guy that comes to mind because I think he is a very talented guy, but he had a flat year last year. And I think maybe on the back of an incident on Mad Monday. But I actually think Adam Elliott is a really good player who we haven't seen the best of there. He might be a kind of guy that could ignite something. Because, sometimes they just lack an energy, that team. They look a bit, as you said, a bit too tradesman. Like they're going through the motions and we've been told this amount of hit-ups and kick here and then... But, you need that kind of X factor. I think he brings an aggression when he's playing well, which he didn't really bring last year. He could potentially swing things a little bit.
Okay, you're going to hate my suggestion.
All right.
I think Dylan Napa will actually be
Okay.
a lot better next year. I think now that the hype around him has sort of died down, expectations of being at the Roosters and actually being a Roosters quality player, now he might actually think, I want to actually be what people thought I could be because he's surrounded by crap. It might free him up a little bit.
He's going to really be known as Big Puppy this time.
I was going to say, yeah.
Well, the player that I expected to have the breakout year was Reece Martin. And, Dean Pay, in his infinite wisdom, decided that he wasn't a first-grade player.
What's doing there, by the way? Do you know the backstory there? Because
No,
it
there's
feels like
gotta be something.
it has to be, right?
Yeah.
Because he's too good not to
He's
be.
got to be a prick.
Yeah, or Dean Pay. He's done something personal to Dean Pay.
I kept trying to ask around. I couldn't
Yeah.
find out anything, even the slightest suggestion as
And
to why.
Mario's quite good at peeking around the curtain when it comes to these things as well. And if you can't suss it out, we at the voluntary tackle certainly can't do it either. And now Dean Pay, just on him, do we still think he will be the man for the job? Is there a chance that his neck will be sliced at some point this year?
I doubt it. I think he's safe for this year.
Yep. And what do you attribute that to? The fact that they've got nothing better going?
I think that they want to be like the Dragons, which who wouldn't?
They want to be like the Dragons.
in terms of stupidly loyal to a club player.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point,
He's,
actually.
he understands the dogs of war mentality.
Yeah.
All that crap about when they had Hasler there and him not understanding the Bulldogs culture, I always thought that was a lot of shit.
But I agree on the outside, but then I start to think, I think about Manly. I mean, that's the same critique of Manly, right?
But a lot of Manly fans think you have to be a Manly player. I don't believe that. I just think Trent Barrett was a shit coach.
Yeah, well, that's very true as well.
Des Hasler, I think the reason he went so well at Manly is because it's easy to look good after Trent Barrett's left, but also he did have an existing relationship with some of the players, and he has got that aura about him in Manly circles. So that does make because he has won grand finals.
He immediately gets buy-in, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He looks like a renewed man though this year. He looks so down and beaten that last year for the Dogs. Yeah. Even in press conferences, he looked borderline suicidal, but he just looked so re-energized from the get-go.
It's almost like the moment he walked into Manly, he had this glow, like the light from heaven coming on him, and all the players were like, oh, it's Des, and they instantly started playing better.
Yeah, and I've always said LSD, it's not a bad performance enhancer when you actually take it as a group. Don't do it on your own.
It doesn't go out of your system as quickly as cocaine.
Okay, well, this is good to know. Do you know who told me that first time? Joey Johns, because he's always in the know when it comes to avoiding a drug test. Now, we have predictions before we go to social media. For me, I do think because of that lack of depth issue, because Kieran Foran's not going to be there from the beginning, I think they're going to struggle again. For me, 10th. I don't know what you guys think.
I was actually going to say 10th as well.
Okay, we've got two 10ths.
Just outside the 8.
I have them. I had them 12th.
12th. Okay.
Yeah, I haven't done up a full list, but off the top of my head, I think.
Mate,
about
that's
12.
not what this show's about, and you know it. So
I'm
you're
sure
fine.
we've had other 10ths as well.
You guys will have to be, someone might actually hold you to account on that, whereas I don't have to be here every week.
That's right. You can scat out of here and it's fine. We asked our listeners how Canterbury will go in 2020. The options were making the top 4, making the top 8, not finals, but okay, and terribly. And 60%, roughly, said no finals, but okay. So essentially, status quo.
Yeah.
Not one person from the 54 votes received so far were willing to say top 4, which doesn't bode well, I guess. Not even one really fanatic Bulldogs fan.
See, top 8 wouldn't actually surprise me that much, simply because I think there's potential for a lot of mediocrity in the comp in 2020 the way there was in 2019.
Yeah.
2019, there was that huge drop-off from 6th place down to the Sharks.
They could be there by default.
Yeah, basically. It was just, who wants a final spot? Are you less shit? All you have to do is finish ahead of the Tigers, and
The
then
Broncos made the finals, for Christ's sake.
I know. But thankfully, they were humiliated when they did.
It was just... Never seen a full house, come to watch a slaughter like that.
It was almost like the Roman Colosseum, wasn't it? They just unleashed the Tigers on the hapless Roman in the middle.
I'm happy to see that happen more often. I'm not a Broncos hater per se, but I still enjoy watching them get flogged.
Yeah,
likewise.
And they've had so much success over the years. It's just nice to see things come full circle.
But most people on social media weren't alive the last time Broncos had success.
This is true, actually.
You know what?
Yeah,
I guess it's
Or at
probably
least they
revealing
weren't-
my age a little
They weren't
bit.
sentient, They were just little...
They were still learning their ABCs when they won it in 2006.
When people looked up to Alfie. Well, for the record, 14.8% said top 8 and 25%, 1 in 4, said terribly. So, I think it's going to be a tough year for the Dogs. If you could give any wisdom to the Bulldogs before we end this segment, what would it be for 2020?
Fold the club.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show, the last one for 2019. And before we go, guys, is there any advice you want to give to the NRL about next year? Is there anything you want to see more of, less of? Anyone you'd like to see murdered?
Well, there was a rumour that David Gallop would be back next year, so my advice would be no.
That's a fantastic bit of wisdom that we need to
Please, no.
start circulating pronto. I haven't heard one positive endorsement of David Gallop when that suggestion was popped
How
up.
bad is the A-League going right now?
I know.
The-
But also, didn't like him when he was the CEO of the NRL.
Manly fans certainly didn't.
So the NRL are thinking they want to bring in a guy who's overseeing a competition whose ratings are now getting so low that they don't even register as ratings. You know what I mean?
Exactly. They're not even watching themselves. Yeah. That's what I love.
I'm sure most episodes of Bluey get more watches than most games.
They make
of
Super
A-League.
Rugby look good, and that's a problem.
That's
Ooh,
tough.
That might be one step too far.
Don't say things you can't take back, mate. That's an important lesson.
No,
on this
I
show.
genuinely follow these figures too. Like Super Rugby ratings are shocking, but they still better than
They're still better than the
Yeah.
A-League. Well, it's all good to
lot of
the
Kiwis
benefit
living
of
in
the
Australia.
NRL, which is a good thing. A little side note, David Gallop used to live not far from me. So I had some sort of interactions with David. Hello, David, if you're listening.
Did you ever egg his house?
I never did anything violent, Mario, but I did a lot of weird. I used to throw a lot of weird at David Gallop. And one thing
Was that a Kiwi accent and you actually just said weed?
No, this is just my voice. Unfortunately, I'm labelled with this very bizarre pastiche of voices. But no, one thing I used to do when I used to drive along, he used to be a fan of jogging around the local area. And whenever I saw him jogging on the road, I'd pull up very slowly in my car next to him, wind down the window, and go until the point where he noticed, right? Because obviously you do notice when there's a car travelling at your jog speed. And as soon as he turned, I'd have a very chuffed look on my face and say, "Way to gallop, gallop. Way to gallop, gallop." And I would say that over and over and over again until he jogged faster to get away from me.
So you helped his personal best, really.
Exactly. I really spurred him on there.
That is so bad you've almost made me like David Gallop.
So what I would say is, as much as your criticism is fair, feel bad for the man because I have traumatised him in my earlier youth.
You're probably the reason the A-League is going so poorly.
I hope so. That's what I tell people. Well, that wraps it up, guys. Thank you very much for sticking around with us throughout the year. Just a reminder, we are on Apple Podcasts, a few other things. I think there's Stitcher, Spotify, and some illegal forums in Russia, probably. You can also follow us on Twitter at Voluntary Tackle. If you feel hungry for more league, you can also listen to other podcasts out there like Sports Best Friends, hosted by our good friend Big T, who has a range of ripper yarns with some former greats to listen to. He's really lining up quite a few recently, so we definitely recommend getting into those. So until next time, just do what a vulnerable 15-year-old girl would do. And tighten the chastity belt anytime you saw Prince Andrew milling around near your toilet block. See you next time. Well, of course, we weren't going anywhere. Well, we will be very shortly, but not before we do our iconic mascot war. Now, this is breaking new ground in the show. We like to forge new spaces. We'll all know, not always successfully. When I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we decided to have 2 people with autism have sex live on the show as ambient noise in the background. That didn't work really well, but hopefully this new ground will be successful because we're going to have a...
So I heard it worked okay for the 2 autistic people, though.
Oh, they were putting it in the wrong place. Anyway, we're going to have a 3-way mascot war. Yep. We don't know what each other's going to say. So on the count of 3, we need to determine who's going to win. 1, 2, 3. The Tasmanian
76er.
Well, that cacophony of noises, let's just do a bit of a rewind there. For the record, mine was the Tasmanian Martin Bryant's. Mario, what was yours?
Mine was the Philadelphia 76ers.
Okay, I love it. You've got a pair of numbers, which will be interesting. And Xander?
The Cleveland Cavaliers.
76ers. We're going to start with you because it's difficult when your mascot is a number. So I'm imagining a pair of 76ers personified, probably the size of Mao Meninga, beefed up 76ers. Would they be fighting as a pair or would they split up? Could they essentially move around in a pincer movement? Is that how they could work?
I mean, how do you defeat a number? Is it just a concept, in fact?
Well, it's like trying to beat time, isn't it?
In reality, for some reason, I don't know what a 76 originally was supposed to be, but, the mascot for the team is a dog. And being that's from Philadelphia, I figure it's going to go around and just infect your mascots with HIV.
I love it. So a pair of numbers, maybe 76 is referring to someone's white blood cell count or something like that.
Or how many days they lived after the diagnosis.
Exactly. That's how many days after being patient 0. Xander, you said Cavaliers, is that right?
Yes, I had to look this up.
Brilliant research on the fly.
So it turns out that a Cavalier is a supporter of King Charles I in the English Civil War. So
what an odd clash.
So I'm assuming they're really English.
All right. So what virtues did they bring to the table when they were protecting the king? Are they armed? I assume they're armed.
I don't even know if they won. So
so basically,
I guess that means we're just
you're going to get hammered in this thing because
they weren't even necessarily active soldiers. They were just supporters.
Well, if we assume that they lost the war, that fits with the club right now, who are losing a lot more games than they win.
That was another reason I chose the Cavaliers.
Now, I've got the Tasmanian Martin Bryant, so obviously I'm bringing a fair bit of anger to the table, and I know I'm armed. That's what I love about my mascot. I know my mascot has the follow-through to callously kill heaps of people. So I feel like I'm against
we went to a really dark place all of a sudden.
I'm just going to invite Jacinda Ardern onto the podcast.
She's coming up next for an exclusive interview. Of course, we're not endorsing my mascot here. We're just seeing who would win in this fictitious war. Hopefully, after I bludgeon your 2 mascots to death, I am incarcerated and there's a due process that follows.
I'm going to say you're losing this very quickly because Martin Bryant in 1996... very different from Martin Bryant in 2019. These days, he's just, yelling at clouds, and gun control means that he can't even get his hands on the weapon that he
I'm going to have to back Murray up on this one. The story's about Martin Bryant at the moment. I wouldn't back him in a fight against a tissue at this point.
Very true. He's put on a lot of weight, I hear.
He might be able to beat up, current Michael Jackson.
Okay. He might be able to dig up a dead body.
Unfortunately, I have been trapped in the prism of my own logic.